Ready? Okay. You tell me when. Yeah. Good evening. Good evening. Thank you for joining us this evening for the Candidate Forum for Missoula City Council Wards 3 and 4. This event is sponsored by the Missoula Office Neighborhoods and the League of Women Voters of Missoula. My name is Geneva Limata, and I am a member of the League of Women Voters of Missoula. I would like to begin this forum by reading the League of Women Voters Land Acknowledgement Statement. The League of Women Voters of Missoula acknowledges that we gather on the traditional lands of the Salish, Kootenai, Kalispel, Pend Oreille, Blackfeet, and Shoshone tribes. The voting rights of these native peoples were not secured until the 1960s, 40 years after the 19th Amendment secured the right to vote for some women. The League is committed to protecting equal access to voting and resisting efforts to disenfranchise. I'd like to thank Kalina Pritchard and Melissa Glukert of Missoula's Office of Neighborhoods for coordinating this forum, our League of Women Voters volunteers, and MCAT for broadcasting this program. We have a live audience tonight in the City Council chamber, and I ask that the audience hold their applause until the end of the forum to maximize the time the candidates have to answer questions. I'd like to thank our candidates for their willingness to serve Missoula and for participating in tonight's forum. Tonight's forum features our two candidates for a city council in wards 3 and 4. Running in ward 3 are Dan Carlino and Jennifer Savage. The candidates in ward 4 are Mike Nugent and David Quattrochi. This forum follows the nonpartisan, unbiased, and impartial format established by the League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan, nonprofit membership organization. We never support specific candidates or political parties. The purpose of this forum is to give Missoula voters an opportunity to submit written questions to the candidates and hear the candidates' personal responses. Audience members may write a question on the cards provided and we will collect them. And people also have the opportunity to submit questions to the Office of Neighborhoods website by noon today. We had so many questions today, so we may not be able to get to all of them, but we will work our hardest to do that. Candidates will be asked as many questions as time permits, and the questions will be screened for duplication. All candidates will answer each question. Each candidate will have the same time to respond. Responses will be strictly timed to ensure fairness. The order of candidates in which they will respond will rotate, so each candidate will have an opportunity to speak first and last. Just before this evening's forum, we drew the candidates' numbers from a hat to determine the speaking order. We will start with opening statements, then have questions, and then end with closing statements. We will begin with 2-minute opening statements from our candidates. The order of our speakers is Ward 3, Jennifer Savage. Ward 3, Daniel Carlino. Ward 4, Mike Nugent. Ward 4, David Quattrochi. I think we can just start. Jennifer, your turn.
All right, my name is Jennifer Savage, and I have been a Missoula resident since 2001. I moved here from Oregon just after graduate school, and I'm one of those people that moved here for a one-year job and never left. I've raised 2 kids here. I have 2 daughters who are 19 and 17, who are off in the world making their way, doing amazing things. I have been a sitting city councilor for the last 3.5 years. I was elected in 2021 to serve Ward 1, and I have been in proud service of Ward 1 ever since. I recently moved to Ward 3, so I am running for election in Ward 3. Some of the reasons that I wanted to continue serving on city council are some of the work that we've been doing the last 3.5 years that I've been on council. One of those things has been working toward affordable housing. We've had several different housing sort of developments that have come through since I've been on city council that have been pretty exciting to work on. One specifically is the Rivara project on the north side, which is on Scott Street. It's going to bring permanently affordable homes to people in a neighborhood that desperately need it. Along with that came a lot of infrastructure that we were able to get pushed through because of that project. And I'm really happy to see that those houses are rising off the ground, and soon enough people will be living there. Another thing that I am interested to keep working on is code reform, which I think just today we saw another big piece of the code reform come out into the public. So yeah, those are the reasons that I'm still here and interested in running.
Thank you. Daniel?
Yeah, my name's Daniel Carlino. I'm one of the current Ward 3 City Council members, and it's been an honor of my lifetime being able to serve on the City Council the last 4 years. And my day job, I'm also an aide for people with developmental disabilities and go throughout their days with them and help them improve their lives. And, the reason I got into politics was through climate activism. The younger generations are just looking at a future that's really uncertain, and we're seeing like natural disasters happening at unprecedented rates, and we're losing like the fish in the Clark Fork rivers. The fires are burning more intense over the years, and I would just think that the government's completely failing us on this issue. And through my climate activism, I decided to run first for Public Service Commission to help regulate Northwestern Energy, and then for City Council in 2021, and was happy to get elected. And since I've been on there, I try to, push for representing renters and low-income people in Missoula. I try and represent people that want to see more action on the climate crisis and working to protect our environment. And I hope to, still get to do so for another 4 years. I'd like to put a lot of good ideas out there, and I'm really proud of the ones that we've been able to get passed through the City Council. And I think every change is worthwhile. So I'm really happy to be here tonight, and thanks for hosting the forum for us.
Thank you. Mike?
Thank you. Good evening, everybody, and thanks so much for being here, both in person and the folks watching online and watching this streaming well after the fact. Before I get into my opening statement, I do want to wish my wife, Stacy, a happy anniversary. It's our 15th wedding anniversary today, and I am spending it with these three fine individuals. So I appreciate your patience, Stacy. Together, we're raising two kids in the town that we grew up in. A lot about Missoula has changed, but the things that make Missoula great are still fundamentally there. And one of the reasons I ran for city council to begin with is to try and make a difference in people's lives and make sure that my kids and so many other Missoulians have the opportunity to live and work here if they want to. And so many of the people I grew up with are struggling to achieve that dream. And it's something that we need to work on every day. And I think that we're doing real things to try and help combat and curb that issue. And the work remains. I'm also very proud of my relationship with Mayor Davis. The two of us obviously engaged in a very passionate and friendly campaign 2 years ago for the mayor's seat, and she won. But since that time, I think we've built a very strong working relationship, and it's the sort of thing that I'm proud of and I'd like to see more of in government, where people can get through elections and then set aside any differences to work together for the betterment of Missoula. And one of the things that I'm really excited about is we bring together significant amounts of housing experience from the nonprofit subsidized world all the way through workforce housing that may not be subsidized at all, and kind of everything in between, to recognize we need solutions across the spectrum. And I'm looking forward to working together with everybody on council for another 4 years.
Thank you so much. David?
Hello. Okay. Yes, thanks for everyone for showing up tonight. League of Women Voters in Missoula neighborhoods for putting this on. Everybody watching it, the future here. I'm David Quattrochi, DQ is a nickname some people use. I am a community organizer here in Missoula. I work for Partnership Health Center, which is a federally qualified health center. Happy anniversary, Mike. Yeah, to both you and Stacy, and thanks for spending your time with us. I have a girlfriend here. She has 2 children. I spend a lot of time with them, helping them develop as they grow. I'm a union leader at my work, vice president at MFPE, the Federation of Public Employees, Local 8512. I do a lot of volunteering in this community with food justice groups like Food Not Bombs, which is going out to feed people who are currently unhoused or just food insecure. My philosophy behind, is that me with the static? My philosophy behind running for local government here is, I think someone smarter than I said this, and I'll blunder it here, is we can kind of judge our town by the way we treat our most vulnerable. And so I'm going to be fighting as a renter and a tenant candidate in our ward. I will be fighting for people who are historically marginalized and just fighting to kind of stay alive, get into housing. And we're a renter majority city, and it's about time we have equal representation on council. So I look to do that and represent everybody. Thank you for the stop signal.
Thank you. And now to the questions submitted by the public. The questions fall into several broad categories, and I'll divide up the time so that we will get to some questions in each category. If you would like me to repeat a question, just let me know. What do you believe is the government's responsibility towards our most vulnerable citizens, including the unhoused? We'll start with Daniel.
Yeah, thank you. I definitely think part of the government's job is to help make sure that everybody can get their basic needs met, whether it be a roof over their head or food on their plate or clean water and clean air to drink and breathe. And, I think the city does a good job in some ways and does a really harmful job in some ways when it comes towards handling our unhoused population. A few years ago, we voted on a resolution to close down the Johnson Street shelter without an alternative space. And, at that time, I put an amendment in place to try and get new shelter beds in place before we close that one. And, to keep trying to work on city council to make that a budget priority, to make sure that we do have funding for places for people to sleep, because come this winter time, I'm really worried about seeing our neighbors freezing. And I think that as soon as so I think that we need to have shelter spaces for people, and I think we need to not criminalize poverty by giving fines or misdemeanor charges to people that have nowhere to sleep at night. So those are some things I'm pushing for on there.
Thank you. Jennifer?
I think it's the government's responsibilities to be a player at the table. I think it's our responsibility to be a partner. And I think that I've really witnessed that with the housing sprint that the mayor introduced this spring as we were talking about closing the Johnson Street shelter, bringing service providers, people who can sort of help people get identification, get them into housing, get them on SNAP benefits if that's what they need. All of the things that sort of we need to do to help build a foundation under someone who is living houseless. I think that that's our responsibility, is to be there. We can also be a facilitator, and we can also be a convener, and people be the sort of group that is bringing everyone together to say, how can we solve this problem?
Thank you. David?
Restate it, please.
Of course. Well, I'll reread it.
Thank you.
What do you believe is the government's responsibility towards our most vulnerable citizens, including the unhoused?
Well, I think it's our responsibility across the board to take care of people, make sure that we have services, social safety nets for people who fall into poverty. After all, we're all Missoulians. Imagine the question being framed toward any other class. We all live here. We all deserve to live here. I agree with Daniel that the idea is not to criminalize. I would oppose ordinance like 1260 that fines people essentially for being poor in public space. I think we need to focus on the low to no income affordability housing here. I think a variety of options are great, but if we don't have the government in the game of providing housing, then the speculators, investors scoop it up and charge market rate rents that got us into this position in the first place. I think, yeah, we just need to treat people like the humans that they are and put the safety nets that we would want for ourselves and the people we care for in place.
Thank you. Mike?
Thanks. I largely agree with what's been said. I think that the ultimate responsibility of local government is to do the best we can to stretch the resources we have to have maximum impact. It would be great to have unlimited resources to solve this problem. And if there was a community in this country who was doing it perfectly, we'd all be copied. I think everyone's trying to find ways to respect people's dignity, respect people as humans, provide opportunity, and also keep communities safe. I think that things like the Housing Sprint, which is the most successful housing program the city has ever done, and the mayor should be credited for having leadership on that front. I also think that things like the Temporary Safe Outdoor Space, which was a partnership between the city, the county, United Way, and the Interfaith Collaborative. I was president of United Way when we put that in place. And I think investing in programs like that have outcomes where we're seeing more than 50% of the people who are participating in them either getting a job or finding permanent housing and having positive outcomes in the long term.
Thank you. Next question. How will you ensure marginalized communities have a voice in city's decisions?
I think that it's important to recognize that everybody gets the opportunity to share their opinion and participate in the conversation. There are so many ways in this modern era to reach people. Obviously, we hear from constituents all the time. I do my best to respond to every email that we get as council members. The public also gets to comment on every action item in front of council, and then they do get to give public comment on non-agenda items, which I know there's debate on when that should be given. But I think that it's also important in the year 2025 to make sure that when misinformation is out there, that we take steps to correct it, because this environment is so heated. And even compared to 2 years ago during the mayor's race, the amount of kind of anger that I hear and see in the world is something that we really need to be aware of and see what we can do as our part at the local city council to help create and foster a better environment.
Thank you. David?
To make sure we're hearing and incorporating marginalized voices into the conversation, it would basically doing what's in my wheelhouse as a community organizer to work with the people most impacted, figure out what's not working, what is working, try to improve on that by advocating for solutions. I've been doing this on the campaign by going door to door, hearing from people directly about what's impacting them in our ward. Often told, thanks for coming by. You're the first one who has. And from there, we can make a plan, because I can't get up here and freestyle and pretend to know exactly what everybody needs and how it impacts them. I have my own identity, and that doesn't cross over with the thousands of people who live in Ward 4. So I've got to hear it from people, and the only way we can do that is to actively seek out what the concerns are. So I plan to honor the engagement done by our city staff, the one making the same wage that I do, who are doing that civic engagement, and actually honor that with action plans.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. How will you ensure marginalized communities have a voice in city decisions?
Thank you. Yeah, I think that I would say the way to do that is to engage that community. We need to bring people to the table who normally are not at the tables of power. And I think that when I first ran for city council, that was actually the reason I ran for city council. I was living in a neighborhood, low-income neighborhood, that was often told kind of what was going to happen to them. And I think that that is a lot of what's been happening with our unhoused community. And I think bringing people to the table, listening, having conversations, and engaging them in real ways. I think the city has done some real engagement when it comes to other issues. And I think that we could kind of duplicate those efforts and really use that engagement structure that we've built to go out and do meaningful engagement.
Thank you. Daniel?
Yeah, some things I've done on city councils to try and change some of the rules to make it easier for people to comment or engage at city council meetings. It should be as easy as possible for people to participate in their local government. And, you know, when we're talking about like people with disabilities, like a policy around that, we need to go talk directly to that community. Or talking about a homelessness policy, we need to go talk to people who are experiencing homelessness in our community and hear directly from them, the people that are going to be most affected by these policies, to truly make good decisions. And, you know, a lot of people don't want to come to like a political event or meeting, so we have to try and meet them where they're at. You know, I've gone around and knocked every door in my district, talked to people face to face that don't normally want to come to a council meeting, and I try to go to as many events as I can to learn what people really care about and try to implement that into policy. And I'm always going to be like an open ear and somebody that people can meet with in my district as well.
Thank you. Next question. As a candidate, how do you plan to address Missoula's over-reliance on apartments and other rental properties as a remedy for the housing shortage? And as a follow-up, do you plan to look at ways to control rent increases after the first year? We'll start with David.
Thank you. Well, I think we're all going to be talking about we need multiple solutions. A lot of us just simply can't afford to buy homes, so it's not something I can do with a snap of the finger. I think we do need that low to no income affordability. I'm going to drill that, you know, and we need safeguards to make sure when we do deals with developers, you know, 1-2% here and there, it's just not getting the job done. When we have the homeless point in time count at the end of every year, it goes up. It goes up everywhere. And Missoula is not the only city, but we have to concentrate on what we can do here. We can enact rent control on a local level, but we can use our lobbying power as a city. We paid the Coalition to Solve Homelessness plenty to go and advocate for expanded shelter support, then we close the shelter. So we've got to actually use our power as a city when we do lobby for things like rent control, which would do what whoever posed this question, and actually flex at the state level and try to build a movement.
Thank you. Mike?
Would you repeat the question?
Sure. As a candidate, how do you plan to address Missoula's over-reliance on apartments and other rental properties as a remedy for the housing shortage? And as a follow-up, do you plan to look at ways to control rent increases after the first year?
Yeah, so like it or not, in the economic system we're in, homeownership is the only way that most Americans can build any financial security. And that is something that has been a concern of mine for my entire professional career. I lobbied the state legislature probably 4 sessions ago now to change the definition of land trust in the subdivision statutes to make community land trusts easier to build. And that change actually allowed the Rivara project to move forward, which is the largest permanently affordable land trust housing opportunity that the state has seen. So I think that we need to see opportunities like that and build upon them. I also think that when the MRA uses TIF money for home ownership opportunities, we need to have a deed restriction attached to them that makes sure that that affordability stays forever. And there are examples that could have been done better. I've talked about them before on the campaign trail. One's the Scott Street Village. We need to make sure that not only the first owner gets that affordability, but every successive owner as well. And those are actually easy things to do.
Thank you. Daniel?
Yeah, you know, in the majority of residential land in Missoula, you can't currently build apartment buildings, but, you know, through our code reform process, we're going to be changing and rezoning the town. And frankly, I think, you know, people need more homes in Missoula, and we shouldn't be blocking housing. And we should have housing of all types, single family, duplex, threeplex, fourplex, and apartments, because we need that for people in our community who need housing, and that'll help bring the cost of housing down. You know, right now the city's selling quite a bit of land, of our publicly owned city land around town, and that's our opportunity to make community land trusts where we can only set the rent or the housing price at a certain amount. We shouldn't just give it away sell off our land to the highest developer, which it looks like we're on track to do with quite a bit of city-owned land. So those are our opportunities. And also, I just had a resolution recently for whenever we use tax increment financing towards housing projects, that we have a portion set aside to be truly affordable housing. So I'll keep pushing for things like that on city council.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Yeah, I agree. I do think that we need all kinds of housing types, and I think that we've learned that with some of the recent developments that have gone in. For example, when we built the Bellagio, we realized that we needed not only studio apartments, we needed things on the smaller end, but we also needed 3 and 4 bedroom apartments, and that's because families need a place to be and need a place to live. Home ownership is relatively unattainable for a lot of people in Missoula, and I think that I'm not sure that we necessarily have an over-reliance on apartments. I think that we need all housing types, and that is one thing that is a way that people can get housed. And so I think that when I think about across the landscape, I too am looking forward to code reform to be able to level that playing field and bring some equity to our neighborhoods. I think that that's something that we haven't had. We've had 1 or 2 or 3 neighborhoods in Missoula have been taking on the brunt of all of the density. And I think that when it comes to it, when we're talking about rent control, I think that because we can't do it locally, I think that there are other things we can do. We can incentivize landlords. We can move forward with education about those kind of things.
Thank you. Next question. In 2004, the city developed a master parks plan. For 20 years, that plan was in place, but there were very few, if any, actual on-the-ground improvements. Why have certain neighborhoods seen such little execution when other neighborhoods have seen vast improvements? What will you do to ensure park plans are executed? We'll start with Jennifer.
So I have been the chair of the Parks, Climate, and Conservation Committee on City Council, and we just undertook an entire new parks plan. It's called the PROST. We spent probably 18 months looking at all of the park needs, park deserts, parks and park improvements, everything from trails to green space to open space. And so I hope that that plan actually is quite equitable. I think it is. I think we spend a lot of time looking at it to make sure that neighborhoods would sort of all benefit from that. And I think sometimes, taking a minute, going back and redoing something, I mean, that's what we needed to do. And so I think we have that in front of us now, and I think it is actually a really good path forward. And it also brings in things that parks are doing that maybe we hadn't anticipated 20 years ago. I don't know that we had anticipated the sort of growth that we have seen in the valley. I think that that's something that we really are interested in knowing what that's going to look like moving forward.
Thank you. Daniel?
Yeah, I think, the outdoor spaces in our parks is one of the things that makes Missoula such a lovely community to live in and so special. And, definitely some neighborhoods are better served than others with this issue. And I think one of the city goals in the PROST plan was to have everybody be able to walk to a park within, I think, 10 or 15 minutes. And I think that's a good goal that we're not currently meeting, but I'd like to see us meet in the future. And I think, again, with some of the city-owned land, that's our chance to create parks. Because, once that land is developed or turned into concrete, it's very, very unlikely that it'll be a park in the future. So we need to think ahead and make sure that we don't lose opportunities when we're selling land or developing land, and make sure that we're able to get parks within walking distance of everybody in town. And that's something I definitely support on city council, and will do my best to push forward.
Thank you. Mike?
Thanks. I think it's a great question. I think we have to be careful, though, because in the last 20 years, the voters of the city of Missoula passed the Parks and Trails bond, which was a $44 million tax bond, which is the biggest single tax bond that I think is on people's tax bills, and that established Fort Missoula Regional Park. It fixed trails all around the community. It helped invest in programs that led us to trails on Mount Dean Stone and partnerships in that front. So there's absolutely a lot of issues, and neighborhood parks are one of them, but I think it's disrespectful to the taxpayers to say that the community hasn't invested in parks in the last 20 years. I think it's been a historical investment in parks. What we need to do now is make sure that we aren't having eyes too big to keep doing new things while we aren't maintaining what we already have. And that's a lot of neighborhood parks and pocket parks. The last part of that bond was supposed to be to improve playgrounds, and it just hasn't happened to the level I think we were promised. So we need to make sure that we're balancing new opportunities with making the limited opportunities, especially in neighborhoods that do not have many parks, making sure those parks are well taken care of, that they're safe, and that they're protected and invested in a way that is fair to the whole community.
Thank you. David?
I think getting anything across the finish line, I think, takes a lot of trust that government will actually follow through on things that where we've gotten civic engagement and kind of directed us what to do. So I would work with my community to make sure that their voices are repeatedly being heard in this chamber. It seems like once they drop off, voters sometimes council members sometimes forget who told them what to do in the first place. And I think we have to remember that this is public space. It's for everybody. And when we do attack and try to actually curb the homelessness issue here, we don't shut off access like we're currently doing, where we take civic and human rights away from people for access to the park. That doesn't mean sleeping in parks. That means not fencing up bathrooms, picnic tables when we fumble and do things like close the shelter. Keeping access to public space is the first problem, and anything we do from there is a bonus.
Thank you. Next question. How would you improve access to mental health and addiction services in the city? We'll start with Daniel.
This is something that we're definitely lacking across the whole country, and something that, the city should be a partner in trying to help with these things. I think something that the city is doing well is like helping like our homeless outreach team that can connect people to resources, or like at the new Blue Heron project where we have like the Trinity Navigation Center to try and get people connected to resources. I think we need to make our mobile support team 24/7 so that there's the proper emergency response team, EMT and psychologist, responding to those mental health calls all times of the day, because they're only operating about 10 hours of the day right now. So I'll be pushing to expand that and try and help fund these resources, because it's super important that people get the care that they truly need.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Yeah, I think this one is tough. I think in 2017, our state legislature took away a lot of resources that we needed as municipalities, that people of Montana needed to be able to seek treatment, to be able to get treatment for substance abuse disorder, for any sort of mental health disorder as well. And I think we have had, I think it has been a Montana-wide crisis ever since. And I think we have turned people out on the streets because they are not able to get their antipsychotics, or they're not able to get from Dillon to Butte to get to their doctor's appointment. And I think this is one of those times when the city can be a convener and also be a loud voice at the state level to help get some resources here. We do have service providers. We have so many people who are like really spending their lives and their careers sort of trying to meet this need. And I think as a city, we can continue to do that work on the state level and continue to bring people to the table and try and figure out how to solve this locally.
Thank you. David?
Do you mind repeating the question?
Sure. How would you improve access to mental health and addiction services in the city?
I fully support doing our best here. It's a shame the Riverwalk drop-in center, or it wasn't even a drop-in center, just like a relief for people in crisis, was shut down this past year. I work, like I said, for Partnership Health Center. I've seen the impact that the Watershed Navigation Center has for people. We have a clinic right on site, and I've seen it work wonders for people who are at different levels of crisis. Also, the mobile support team that provides an alternative, you might hear it referred to as the MST. Currently, we use it to kind of mitigate issues when we're evicting people out of parks and public space. This team was meant to do a lot more than that. So I'm with Daniel in making that, expanding that service, and actually taking relief off of our police department getting all behavioral health related 911 call info so that we know how much is going, diverting to the police that should be going to services like that.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks. I think one of the big steps we've taken is through the fire levy, we were able to make the mobile support team permanent. I helped get that levy through, and I'm proud to be endorsed by the Missoula Firefighters Union, which also those employers are part of that union. I think it's important to note that mobile support team exists for people in crisis. And I've actually been on a ride along with the Missoula Police Department where the mobile support team was called in, and it was obvious that situation, the person did not need the emergency room and they did not need to end up in jail. And before we had that, there were no other options. And so that is really helping families in really serious moments. And so I recognize that my opponent's critical of that being used in one part, but it is not the only. And in fact, I think it's not the majority of the calls. It's helping family members, because mental health crisis impacts everybody. It does not care about economic status. It does not care about political party or anything like that. And having programs like that in Missoula are crucial. And I think the next step, now that it's permanent, is getting it funded 24 hours a day.
Thank you. Next question. How do you plan to balance development with neighborhood character and environmental sustainability? We'll start with Mike.
Thank you. That's a great question. And I think this is going to be the conversation of the next few years, because the legislature in the last 2 sessions has actually made some pretty monumental changes to what's required in neighborhoods. And nobody has realized it yet because the impact hasn't quite hit. But basically every neighborhood now, duplexes and ADUs are legal by right. And so that alone is going to change the feel and density of a lot of neighborhoods. And I think that's something that we as a community need to start planning for. Building density where we already have services, where we already have sewer, where we already have water makes sense, and it helps us build more inexpensively to create those opportunities, both home ownership and sometimes rental, for people who otherwise can't afford it. I think our code reform project is leading the way in the state of Montana in trying to recognize those goals we've laid out as a community and in our land use plan around the environment and around housing and density and really our population numbers, to allow builders, both private and nonprofit, to meet those goals with us.
Thank you. David?
I'll start writing these down. Can you just say it one more time?
Absolutely. How do you plan to balance development with neighborhood character and environmental sustainability?
Well, I think that I hear a lot when I'm door to door about people worried about sprawl, right? And it's something as simple as like hearing about a deer issue, which I'm sure Mike and everyone who's served on council, it's just rampant. And it's a real concern, but I think that, it's indicative of when we build further out from the city center, the kind of challenges we have. Some people are afraid of mountain lions coming down because there's deer in their neighborhood. I'm excited for the code reform, as dense as that is for a lot of us to understand, is building the infill, ADUs, getting creative about the housing we can build that doesn't put a further strain on our land, that doesn't take away our skyline and ability to see this beautiful bowl we live in. But that also means, retrofitting older buildings to be environmentally sound and figuring out a way to do that rather than worrying about all the roadblocks in front of it.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Yeah, so for 16 years in Missoula, I lived in one of those neighborhoods that was, I think you could argue that the neighborhood character has drastically changed due to development. And I think that for me, the thing that is that I have been most excited about with code reform is that every neighborhood gets to play its part. Every neighborhood gets to be a part of our housing solution and help us be able to provide housing for people, and also not sort of sacrifice sort of one neighborhood or two neighborhoods in terms of changing everything in that neighborhood. I think that the way that the land use plan is written, we will be developing inward. And I think that part of that will answer the environmental question, because I think it will help us to create more bike networks, pedestrian networks, have walkable shops in neighborhoods, be able to have a coffee shop or those kinds of things that will kind of create a little bit more of that balance that I think probably this person was talking about.
Thank you. Daniel?
Yeah, we've got a ton of beautiful like historic neighborhoods in Missoula, and most of those neighborhoods couldn't be rebuilt today under our current like zoning and building codes. So I think we need to allow those types of buildings that we all love in those neighborhoods to be built again, where you can walk to like a corner store or to a cafe and, you know, have, you know, like beautiful brick buildings and ones around town. And, you know, I definitely don't want us to urban sprawl any more than we have to, or that we are. And, you know, that we need to preserve land and, you know, develop like within the urban core, not urban sprawl out and destroy our natural environment. And also I'd like to see better protections for building along the river and floodplain. You know, I think at times we've, you know, built too close to the river and caused some environmental damage. And then I guess lastly too, like there's been times on city council where the city council's voted to rezone open space to allow for development, and I voted against those. You know, I think we need to make sure that, you know, we're preserving that open space and not rezoning it.
Thank you. This question has been paraphrased just a bit. Crossing some streets has become so dangerous that residents have been forced to use flags at crosswalks to cross safely. How will you work with neighbors on both immediate fixes, like flashing speed signs, and long-term solutions to improve pedestrian safety? We'll start with David.
Yeah, I heard this one up at Farview's Patty Canyon neighborhood meeting a couple months ago. There's a lot of these spots that, whether they're kind of blind corners, there's got to be a better way to say this, but corners that are hard to see around, right, is what I mean. There's one in Southwest Higgins, right at the corner there of Patty Creek. You know, a lot of people they come to these meetings and it's like, what can we do? What can we do? And, you know, our city staff is telling them, well, we have this many resources. Can we get a cop to sit on this corner? And they're busy patrolling a lot of the poorer neighborhoods and around the shelter. So I think we got to make sure we're equitably using our resources around town to make sure we can address every neighborhood's need. And put in things, you know, if they're not lights, I've heard a lot of people complain about roundabouts, but something that would mitigate traffic from just flowing at night. I hear a lot of people complain about speeding through the hills as well. Stop.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks. You know, one of the most difficult things is individual constituent complaints and concerns about traffic and intersections, because often there are different interests. And the Patty Creek Higgins intersection is a great one. I'm glad you brought it up, because I've been on council for 4 years and I've talked about it, but I've lived in that neighborhood for 40 now. And about 25 years ago, the city actually offset that intersection because they didn't want through traffic going on Patty Creek. And so they've intentionally said, we aren't going to put traffic control there because we don't want to make traffic easier to flow into the neighborhood, because they want to keep the neighborhood safe and they don't want, you know, the pressure on the crosswalks by the school and stuff like that. But some of the people who live right there would like to see a stoplight so they could get out into traffic. So it's a tough one where there's not always a right answer. One of the things that I would like to see the city do is focus more on going and fixing the problems where people are, not trying to engineer where we want them to go. This is particularly true around schools. I think the city's doing a really poor job in responding to neighborhood and constituent concerns and traffic around schools.
Thank you. Daniel?
Yeah, we far too normalize people getting in car crashes or people getting hit by cars in modern society. And when it comes to designing our streets, that's our opportunity to prevent those things from happening. You know, it's a competing interest between making cars go faster or letting people get to where they need to go safer. And, you know, on city council, I passed a budget amendment to double the budget for like neighborhood traffic circles or quick builds where people can help build crosswalks and make bulb outs to make the crossing distance shorter. When it came to the Russell Street expansion, where it's going to get expanded on some sections from 2 lanes to 5 lanes of cars, that's going to make crossing Russell almost impossible and far more dangerous. And when it came in front of us, I voted that down. I think we need to pick the safer street design, not the one that makes people go faster, because people's lives are at stake here, and it's not worth it. So I'd like to see us get more on track on going with the safer options.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Yeah, I think the Ward 1 has been had some particular pain points over the time that I've been the representative there, and particularly on the north side, we have a lot of people that use our neighborhood streets as cut-throughs, and we've had just a lot of increased numbers of people living there. And I think with our code reform, we are going to actually see more of that, because we are sort of encouraging people to build in. And so one of the things that I did after hearing from several neighbors on many different streets on the north side is we called a neighborhood meeting, and we asked the city to come in, and we were like, let's get the maps out and let's look at this. You know, where can we do a quick build roundabout? Where can we do some they call it a girdling in to make sure that cars slow down. We had to remind them that there were 23 children that lived in 3 blocks on one street on the north side, and that there's parking on both sides of that street. Kids hide between cars, that you can't see them. And this is right near a Head Start. So it was really kind of bringing people together to say, like, let's solve this problem together, and let's talk about what we can do. So.
Thank you. Next question. Please discuss what you think the most pressing issues are for your ward, as well as for the city of Missoula. We'll start with Jennifer.
That's a nice softball. I think the most pressing issue is housing. I think it's housing in all forms. I think it's our houseless community. I think it's making sure that they are treated with dignity and respect, and that we can put resources toward getting people housed. I think it is property taxes. I think we are choking on property taxes, frankly. That's in Ward 1, Ward 3, and all of Missoula. I think affordability is still a real issue, and I think we've done a lot since I've been on council, but there's a lot more to do. I think there is also the issue of people who have paid off their houses and they are trying to stay there, and there's very little option for them. If they want to sell, there's nowhere to go. There's no place that they can afford to live and still be able to walk to the grocery store. So I would say housing. Housing is the biggest thing.
Thank you. Daniel?
Yeah, I agree that affordable housing is the biggest issue for my ward and for the city at large. So many of our friends and family are getting priced out of town, trying to afford to pay rent, or can never afford to buy a home in Missoula anymore, or people that are on fixed incomes that can't afford to pay the forever increasing property taxes too. You know, I think we need to get this tax situation fixed at the state level, and you know, I'm happy to support it as a city council member, but we should be taxing the richest in our state at a higher rate, and stop taxing everyday people, you know, out of their homes. And you know, some things that we should be doing on city council is trying to get more housing off of the market. You know, as long as people have to rely on the free market to get a roof over their head, then we're going to always see people that have and people that do not have housing. So I think we need to look at doing more community land trusts when we're selling off city land, and we need to help get more funding into our affordable housing trust fund to build housing that people can truly afford, not leaving them up to dry with the free market.
Thank you. Mike?
Thanks. I mean, obviously there's the theme, and affordability is a big one. We're seeing the impact of affordability because a lot of neighborhoods that are established, Ward 4 is a very established part of town. School attendance numbers are going down because young families can't afford to move into the neighborhoods. But we have a bigger issue because, like, the house that I live in now, my wife and I have owned for about 12 years, 13 maybe, and we couldn't afford it today. But we could afford it when we bought it. And that's because home prices have gone up so much faster than everything else, people's incomes and everything else that contributes to that, that we are creating this cycle where people who want to downsize can't afford to downsize. They're overhoused, but they have nowhere to go. It's impacting the schools and the funding and all of those things. But at the same time, we have so many people that we want to help solve these problems for. We've got all kinds of solutions, which I'll get into in another answer. I would be remiss to not say one of the most important things we hear about on the doors is urban deer, and I have a update on that at some point.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, it's housing, it's affordability. At the doors, I hear our older citizens being priced out of homes that they thought they'd retire in. They're on fixed incomes. People who bought what they thought would be a fixer-upper now are waiting on a raise to be able to finish their kitchen. Renters like me, graciously rented to me somebody's basement is where I'm at. Basement apartment. I'm not just dwelling in the dark somewhere. I talk to people around the shelter, the No Camp, Missoula crew, and I think a lot, talking to them, they're indicative of like a greater like temp check on the ward of people just not feeling like they're being heard. So we get a little bit somewhere, but we don't follow through with the whole thing. People want solutions. I think transparency is another big thing across the whole city. Where's our money going to? Why aren't we involved in the budgeting process? I'm not fiscally conservative, but we got to know where our taxes are going to, so when we get that property tax increase, people feel good about their taxes.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Climate Smart Missoula. How and what would you prioritize to encourage more active transportation throughout Missoula, whether that be biking, walking, transit? And what experience can you draw upon to affect change in this sector? We'll start with Daniel.
Yeah. One of the things I got first passed on city council was our Vision Zero transportation safety policy to make sure that we're going with this safer street designs when we're changing street designs or building new streets. And, more people will be able to walk, bike, roll places if they feel safe in doing so. Like, nobody's wanting to do that on Reserve Street where it's completely dangerous. So first of all, we need to design our streets safer. And we also need to rezone our town, allowing for mixed use where people can walk to like that cafe, walk to that corner store, bike down the street to like the coffee shop that you want to go to. The way our city's been built for the last 50 or 60 years has been people live here and the places you want to go are over here, and it's forced everybody to have to drive a lot more. So safer streets and mixed use where people can live close to the places they want to go, like amenities.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Can you repeat it one more time?
Yeah. How and what would you prioritize to encourage more active transportation throughout Missoula? Bike, walk, transit, and what experience can you draw upon to affect change in this sector?
Great. I think the thing that I would sort of champion in this situation is connectivity. I think that we have a lot of sidewalks that don't go anywhere. I think we have bike lanes that, while I know that our city staff is trying to create sort of a more full map of how people could bike across town, I think that we still have pockets that make it really difficult. I think it's really difficult, for example, to bike down the hip strip. I think it's difficult in some places to be able to take alternate transportation even if you want to. I think we could talk about expanded bus lines. But those connectivity pieces, I think, are the biggest thing in my mind. I recently had been living in a neighborhood where mostly we just walk in the middle of the street because our sidewalks are not connected. And if they are, there are so many places that need repair that it's difficult to walk. So we walk in the middle of the street. And I noticed this because I recently moved to a neighborhood that actually does have sidewalks. And so I realized I was walking down the middle of the road and people were looking at me. But I think connectivity is a really big piece of that.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, I own a bike. That's my mode of transportation. I rely on our mountain line bus system to get me around when it gets slushy and cold. I think expanding, not that I can do this with the snap of my finger, but anything we can do to help expand services. I love that we've got free rides to Marshall Mountain. I'd love for people getting off jobs past 10 p.m. to be able to also get a ride home in the dark and the cold. I remember going to a local government academy program the city puts on a couple of years ago and asking the MRA during a presentation, since we're talking about the sidewalks, how do we get the sidewalks? When I visit my friends in Franklin or the Fort, it's like an obstacle course. And they said, well, the come to reality answer is we got to make sure our banks are taken care of before we get those sidewalks. I think we got to make those first and foremost a priority when we are spending people's taxes, to make sure that those infrastructure is at the heart of it and not expecting it to trickle down.
Thank you. Mike?
I think one of the biggest things is connectivity, but I also think talk is cheap. There is no department in the city that has put in more sidewalks than the MRA. The people who are really getting penalized are the homeowners that aren't in the MRA districts, because they have to pay for their own sidewalks. But the people who are in MRA districts, like the folks on Wyoming Street and stuff like that, the MRA has invested in miles and miles of sidewalk in this community that wouldn't be there otherwise. So part of the trick with people when they talk about the MRA is that they don't understand that to generate revenue to pay for things like sidewalks and parks and things like that, they have to get an increment. So they do have to invest in other projects. But the MRA has done so much to help connectivity. They're the reason the Bitterroot Trail exists, that lets people shortcut on bikes and walk through the middle of town as opposed to doing the patchwork of roads and being out in traffic. They're the reason that the Riverfront Triangle is connected in MRA districts. So I think that if we are talking about connectivity, we should want more MRA districts because they actually have the resources to invest in it.
Thank you. Next question. Man, I need glasses. Many candidates share similar values around issues like housing, climate, and community equity. With that in mind, what sets you apart from your opponent, and how does your approach to achieving your goals differ? We'll start with Mike.
Thanks. I think that, I've said many times that government only works if good people step up and get involved. And, I obviously have my differences with my opponent. I have my differences with some of the people I serve on, but I appreciate everybody who's up here for running and trying to be part of the solution. I think I bring a wide array of experiences, but everybody brings different lived experiences to these jobs. And one thing that you're never going to hear me apologize for is I focus on details. And sometimes in campaigns, people like catchphrases, they like words, they like promises, but they don't ask how. How are we going to do it? How are we going to pay for it? And I'm someone who's always going to dig deep and say, what is actually going to make this policy work? Not just does it sound good on paper, but how will it work in real life? And I would say that if you look at the people who have endorsed me, from Mayor Davis, from Council President Sherrill, from several members of the state legislature, they know that I'm a doer, that'll go out and get things done. And I'm one of the people that regular citizens call when government's frustrating them, and I step up to the plate.
Thank you. David?
I think the difference here in terms of housing, climate, general equity, as I understood the question, as a community organizer, I'm always going to center the people. So that's where the solutions are going to come from. That's how we're going to know what the issues are. And when we talk about dealing with homelessness, for instance, I work hard to, have meetings with people right inside the shelter so we understand what comes next. I knew from them, as an example, the demands coming out of people who are going to get evicted when we chose to, or when we voted to shut down the shelter, that they wanted tenant protections, for instance. They wanted a repeal of the ordinances that would criminalize their existence. I'm always going to put the people of Missoula first. And if we can't figure out a solution, as long as we know that we're leading with the people and their concerns and the right decisions. They might be hard decisions, but we've got to focus on what the right decision is. And I think that would be a huge difference in Ward 4.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Yeah, I think that the thing that was important to me and has been important the whole time being on city council has been about building relationships. So building relationships with my colleagues on council, building relationships with community partners, and building relationships with constituents. I think that that's why the majority of city council has endorsed me. I think that's why the county commissioners have endorsed me. So has the mayor. So has the Montana Conservation Voters. I think that part of that is being able to sit down and listen and talk to people and be able to work together to bring things forward. And I think that that collaboration is something that I'm pretty proud of. And Mr. Carlino brings a lot of referrals, for sure. Not a lot of them get through. And I would argue that some of that is because some of that work is not happening, and some of that sort of relationship building, cooperating, collaborating. So that's what I would say the difference is.
Thank you. Daniel?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few different things between us. You know, I think on paper we both support like climate, environment, affordable housing, but when it comes to like the nitty gritty votes, there's quite a difference. You know, like when we're talking about like selling off like the city lands, like I'm definitely against doing that unless we're going to get like a community land trust or stark public benefits. And you know that hasn't came quite yet, but now we've got 30 acres up for sale. You know, when this like Donald Trump's appointed Supreme Court allowed cities to criminalize or give out fines for people that are experiencing homelessness, even if there's not shelter beds, immediately the city council passed giving people fines. And I stand up for human rights, not for criminalization of homelessness. And then also, I think renters in our town are the majority of our town, and I think they need representation on city council. So I try to do what I can to fight for them. But, you know, I'm not on cruise control. I try to introduce as much policies, and I've gotten the most changes passed out of any of us in the last 4 years as well by just introducing a lot. You know, I'm really hungry for change, and, you know, I think we could be doing a lot better.
Thank you. Next question. A large portion of the city budget pays for police and fire protection. Do you think our first responders are adequately prepared to respond to a major disaster such as a wildfire or flooding? What other tools do you think they or does the city need?
Well, I think we can look at last summer with that really nasty windstorm that came through as a kind of litmus test for that. And the fact that churches and other places we're talking about opening up to take anybody who might be displaced tells us that at least as a city, we're not. I'm not sure what the police's role would be in time of emergency, maybe is like safety patrol. But what we would need in that case is the infrastructure to actually buoy something like that and be prepared. I think shutting down a shelter is a pretty big red flag in terms of being emergency prepared. Things like that have to be in place for any of us. It doesn't just matter if you're homeless. It matters if you're displaced by an extreme weather event or something like that. So I think it's more about infrastructure. I hope that they're prepared. They do have a hold on the largest part of the budget, but it's more about infrastructure and what we can actually do to buoy the crisis.
Thank you. Mike?
Thanks. I think that we've taken steps to make sure the fire department is prepared by the citizens passing the fire levy and creating another engine company. We're on track to build a new station in the middle of town, which will help response in both kind of what the natural expectation of what a public safety call might be and everything else that the fire department responds to. In my ride-alongs with both fire and police, it's striking that the things that people see on TV that those people respond to versus the calls that they actually go to, they're basically the last resort in this community to solve problems nobody else knows how to solve. And sometimes that's the community tasking them with things they're not equipped for, which is why it's so important for us to continue to invest in things like the mobile response team and make sure that we can free up our first responders to be ready for the calls that they're trained for and that they're ready for every single day. But I also think that there's a responsibility that falls on all of us. And during the storm last summer, I spent about 3 days just driving around town with a couple of buddies at a big dump trailer, helping people clear stumps and brushes. And it was heartening to see the community pull together and help the first responders and their neighbors respond to emergencies.
Thank you. Daniel?
Yeah, definitely strong supporter of our emergency response teams and would like to see us, you know, fully fund things like the mobile support team, the homeless outreach team, and the other proper emergency response teams in the future. You know, instead of like a few years ago, the city started paying, you know, over $700,000 a year now to have private security companies patrolling the streets and acting as you know, private police officers. And I definitely do not support that. I think we need to have public emergency response teams. And also we need to handle these issues upstream rather than, you know, always having to respond to things. We can, you know, not allow building where we know it's going to flood. We could, fund a shelter rather than having to increase all of that emergency response and trips to the hospital, trips from the police and fire. Those are all the downstream effects by not handling these issues upstream with providing proper resources like a shelter or places for people to sleep. So come this winter, I'm really worried about our neighbors experiencing homelessness, and I think we need the proper emergency response teams for them, but we need to get that social safety net in place.
Thank you. Jennifer?
I have full faith in our firefighters and our police. I'm super grateful for the work they do. I'm really glad the fire levy passed so that we are able to hire many more firefighters, because we have needed to do that for many, many years. And I also am really grateful for the work of the mobile support team, hot team, all of these people that are out there sort of on the ground. But I guess I will say that, like, when I think about devastating wildfires, for example, like we've seen in California, Colorado, that just are decimating towns, Southern Oregon, all of these places, I'm not sure that any city is really ready for that, and that's a climate problem. And that is something that I feel like we also need to be addressing, continuing to meet our climate goals, continuing to do all that we can do with mitigation, because that's ultimately where sort of those natural disasters are coming from. And I think that, I've driven through Talent, Oregon, I've driven through LA this year. I mean, it's devastating what is happening just with, just even over the last 10 years when it comes to these kinds of natural disasters.
Thank you. I think this will be our last question. Civic engagement is what makes democracy tick. What are you doing personally to engage and educate the public on the inner workings of civic life? We'll start with Jennifer.
I talk a lot to my neighbors. I talk a lot to people I know. People ask questions a lot about serving on council and what is that like. I also feel like I feel like I engage in conversations with people. I think that we live in an age where a lot of people are, sort of living on social media, and there's a lot of misinformation out there. And to me, it all really goes back to conversations, in-person meetings, reading the same books, having conversations about, articles that we're reading, those kinds of things. I have 2 young daughters, and trying to teach them how to be engaged civically has really been interesting as they've gotten older, and trying to understand sort of the questions they have, what are their needs, and kind of how those needs can get met. And I have to say that they are not necessarily finding that on TikTok, they're not really finding that on Snapchat. And I think I see them even falling back to sort of having in-person conversations. So,
Thank you. Daniel?
Yeah, I think we need to make it easier for the public to participate. People used to be able to come to city council meeting at 6 p.m. and say whatever they need to say to their local government. And then the city council changed that about a year ago, and we've seen public comment just go way down. And we need to make it as easy as we can for people to participate in city council meetings. I try to go to as many different group events around town, and I knock on every single person's door myself and introduce myself and see what's on their mind, because not everybody's going to want to go to a political meeting or event. You got to meet them where they're at. And, all of us use social media when we're running for office, but I try to use it year round to let people know what's going on in city council, because we do have to meet people where they're at. And a lot of people are on social media, and I think that's a piece of it. But clearly, like, the in-person interactions is the most important, and trying to talk to people, make it easy for them to participate in government and hear them out.
Thank you. Mike?
Would you repeat the question?
Certainly. Civic engagement is what makes democracy tick. What are you doing personally to engage and educate the public on the inner workings of civic life?
I respond and I show up where a lot of people are who don't come to council meetings. And I think one of the most dangerous things that I believe Mary Angan told me when I first got elected is, don't assume that the loudest voice is the only voice that matters. And there are a lot of people that show up regularly, that come to council regularly, that give us comment, and that is very important. But we should be very careful to assume that that is representative of the broader conversation. I think that the whole conversation around parks last summer is a perfect example of that. Myself, Mayor Davis, Council President Sherrill, and Councilwoman Jones stood in a park in a rainstorm last summer. It was probably, in retrospect, pretty dangerous from the weather standpoint. But we stood there and listened to people and their frustrations on every side of the spectrum on that issue, because those people were never going to show up in this chamber, but they needed to be heard and their voices needed to be part of that conversation. And I think that so much of this narrative has turned to, when people get a talk at council, we should be talking to the people that don't show up at council. We should be going where they are.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, I was here during those hearings, and we'd unpacked the room a couple times, and it's like the council was looking above us like, well, we just haven't heard from anybody. It's a slap in the face for people to show up like this and not be heard. Like I said, I followed up with a lot of people who were from the No Camp Missoula group who were in here. We may not have aligned on what to do about the parks, but at the end of everyone's comment was, and we need a place for people to go. I intend to actually listen to that and try to work with people towards solutions. I've been canvassing as much as I can to actually learn what the issues on a micro level, neighborhood by neighborhood. That's the only way I'll have any clue of what the priorities are for people in my ward. Making sure people know their rights too. I think, or how to engage here in council. And honoring what the neighborhood council groups do. We can't have, 3 or 4 people toiling away trying to get a tree planted in a park forever. We got to make sure that's an actual channel into decision making in this council for the work and time that they're putting in.
Thank you. Now we'll have the 2-minute closing statements from candidates. We'll start with Daniel, then have Jennifer, then David, and then Mike.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for hosting the forum, and for everybody who came to listen. Feel free to reach out to me any time of the year, and I'm happy to meet with any of you and chat about whatever's on your mind and things you'd like to see from me as a council member and from the city as a whole. I think we live in such a beautiful community, and I'm really proud to be a Missoulian. It's a really special place, and I'd like for us to keep it that way and make improvements. At the same time, we're facing a lot of serious issues with like the climate crisis, environmental issues, people getting priced out of town, homelessness increasing. And these issues need to be addressed with a sense of urgency and matching up to the scale that the issue demands. And, being on city council, I feel like the majority of city councils unfortunately been on cruise control, where we wait to see what comes in front of us, and then we know that the vast majority are going to vote yes, and then that's how things work. But, on city council, I'm somebody who tries to put ideas forward and tries to make some change and get things passed and push the envelope. I'm proud to be a representative for people that are the more progressive side of our community, and I'm happy to be a representative for people in our town that are renting or people that are living low income like myself. And, when it comes towards another 4 years, if I'm able to get elected, I promise that I'll, push a lot of policies forward and try to work collaboratively with my colleagues and with city staff to do what we can to get change done. And, these issues are really serious, and they need people to step up and match up to the severity of the issues. And, I'm happy that I've gotten, changes passed to the city budget. People need to be able to elect the representatives that decide how their tax money is spent. And I try to always change the city budget each year and have successfully passed a handful of budget amendments and do what I can there. But I'm hungry for change, and I'm here to represent you all. And I'd be honored to have anybody's vote.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for hosting tonight. Several of us are on, 2, 3, 4 forums this week. So we are really glad to get in front of different audiences, I think. I've been on the city council for 3.5 years, and some of the things that I'm most proud of have been working for affordable housing on the north side, the Rivera project. Again, I'll mention it again, and I am that proud of it because we spent 2 years sitting in working groups trying to get that financial stack to work, and we worked hard, and it didn't pencil a lot, and we came back and back and back, and I think that speaks to a lot of collaboration, a lot of relationship building just among partners and other people on council that were there. I'm really proud of the infrastructure that we've been able to bring to Scott Street as well. The roundabout just went in at Phillips and Scott. Lowell School, I think, is pretty happy about that. And one of the first questions I asked when I started running for city council is, what is the impact of Lowell School for all of the development that's going on the north side? So I'm glad to see that they're getting some infrastructure to support that. Also really proud of the pedestrian bridge that we were able to fix on the north side. That thing had been needing repair for a really long time. It was closed for 2 years. It is a massive thoroughfare for people on bikes, on foot, people pushing strollers, low-income folks just trying to get downtown. So I'm really proud of that work as well. But I'd say the thing that I'm most proud of on city council is the fact that is the relationships that I've built, the collaborations that we've been able to form, the conversations that we've been able to have to move things forward. And that's something that I want to continue doing. It's the work I want to continue doing, bring that into this code reform that's coming very soon. But the implementation of that will, sort of take place over the next several years, and I'd like to be a part of that. I feel like I listen to my constituents, but I also feel like they elect me to use my heart and my brain and to represent them, and that's what I would continue to do on council. Thank you.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, thanks for everybody coming out, whether you liked what I said or not. I'll be fighting for you, if you're in my ward or in Missoula at large. I'm bucking against the modern tradition of the kind of paternalistic attitude that this job is just a little too complex for somebody new to come in, and you might need a running start of 4 years before you have a clue. That means none of us would have an opportunity if that's how jobs worked. All these questions that I heard from you tonight were rooted in how can we dream to do better. That means you're not satisfied with the status quo. All respect due to Mike, he is part of this. He votes on a block that kind of gets us where we're at and keeps us where we're at. He's done a lot of great stuff too. I told him last night when we were jabbing each other, Mike, I don't hate you at all, buddy. It's nothing personal. We just got to be able to do something completely different here. I would vote against term limits. I am staunchly in favor of a democratic process where we develop leaders within our community so that people like me can run after me. I'm not here to clog up the seat or become a career politician on the order of years or decades. That's not my role. My role is to steward this for the next person in our ward who believes that they can do this, because quite literally all of us can. I'm running for the people who are on fixed incomes, who are worried about if they can retire in the house that they bought decades ago. I'm running for the people who are frustrated that the sidewalk that the MRA supposedly is bound to fix hasn't been fixed for years. They've done a lot of great work. I know it's frustrating to hear, but people have critiques at the doors, and we got to face that and restructure that and get civilian oversight over budgetary processes and the way that we develop this town, because the people run the show. I'm not in here to come up and freestyle. I'm going to learn from people that I am neighbored with, and that's how I'm going to govern, because I'm not here as a king or anyone who is going to tell you how it is. I'm here to represent you.
Mike?
Thanks. I think that it's kind of funny because anything on council takes at least 7 votes to get done. So there's this theme in this campaign, no matter the candidate, like the 8 people and stuff. It's like, that's pushing Missoula forward. And we sometimes vote together, we sometimes don't, but every issue that passes has to have at least 7 votes. So this idea that you're bad if you vote in the group that gets things done is kind of crazy. I've also never said that first-term council members can't be effective. I think if you ask my colleagues, they'd say I'm an incredibly effective first-term council member. That's why the fire union has endorsed me. That's why the Montana conservation voters have endorsed me. That's why the Missoula Dems have endorsed me. It's not about thinking you know everything. It's about recognizing that you need to put in the work to make policies work. And I think that's a distinction that's kind of lost on some of the candidates you're hearing from out there. You can't just get up and say, I want affordable housing. You need to work with the people who actually know how to get that done and figure out what's actually going to work. We can't just throw a policy that says every MRA project has to have a certain percentage of affordable housing, because you were forgetting the details of who's going to run it. Our mayor is one of the best permanently affordable housing developers in the state's history. And she would tell you that a project's not going to work if there isn't people there to run it. And so the details actually do matter. And I'm never going to apologize for being someone who cares about details, because details are what has kept the lights on in Missoula. Details are why this community is progressive and leads the way on so many things. We've got climate action that other communities are jealous of. We've got a housing trust fund that nobody else in the state does. We have the Housing Impact Fund, which is $9 million going on $10 million, a partnership with the MEP and NeighborWorks Montana that's going to help leverage investments to really, truly make a difference. Missoula is leading the way, and it didn't get there by catchphrases, and it didn't get there by people who just said, I'm going to show up and figure it out. It got there by people who are willing to do the work.
Thank you. Thank you, all candidates, for your thoughtful responses, and most of all, for your willingness to serve the Missoula public on our city council. November 4th is Election Day. This will be an all mail-in election. Ballots will be mailed to voters 20 days prior to the election. Ballots may be returned in the mail or in person to the Missoula County Elections Office. Ballots must be received at the Missoula County Elections Office by Election Day, November 4th, 2025 at 8 p.m. You must be registered to vote and be listed as an active voter on the registration rolls to receive a ballot. Check your registration information at the My Voter page on the Montana Secretary of State's election website. If you're not registered to vote, contact the Missoula County Elections Office at 406-258-4751 for instructions. And voters can find information about all of the candidates running for office at League of Women Voters' nonpartisan election information website, vote411.org. On behalf of the Missoula League of Women Voters, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and please remember that your vote counts. Thank you.